All right, guys. So we're amidst a pandemic. So what do we want to do about that? What's I don't know. What have you guys been doing with your art? Have you been doing anything? Have you been sort of taking a break? What's been going on with y'all?
Oh, I'm sure I took too long of a break, far too long. I spent a lot of time just like laying horizontally in bed for like weeks and playing words with friends. But now I'm sort of pushing myself to do some revising of older projects. I can't quite I can't quite get myself to generate new writing content, but I can like look at things and cut them and rearrange them and do some editing. And I'm hoping that that gets me closer to like generative writing
Are
for
you editing
myself.
specifically for like Zoom stuff or just for you?
No, just because I have readings, whether they're Zoom readings or not, like I have stuff coming up that I need to give a script to people, so I want the script to be better than it was the last time. Uh, and so that's what I'm doing. But people are like, what are you writing that's new? And the answer is at the moment, nothing. But I have them somewhere back here, in the brain to be excavated at a later time. How about you guys?
Hmm. For me, well, I've been like teaching, and the end of the semester is like this week, so that's fun. Like I'm about to have more time, more space, but I've been just like sort of in survival mode and like trying not to fall into like the capitalist trap of like having to like produce work right now. Like we're in we're in these times, these unprecedented times, as people keep saying, where it's like then the word unprecedented just begins to lose all sense.
Meaning.
Yeah, you're like, well, maybe there was a precedent for all of this happening and we just didn't see it. Like, sorry, but not sorry, like, yeah. So I've just been, I like write down my ideas when they come just like out of nowhere, and I have like these documents that I'm doing like month to month. Like I have an April creativity document, and I have like a May creativity document that's sort of like my own personal artistry stuff of like ideas that I have, or just thoughts that I have, or things that I want to explore later, or I have like back burner things that are like in my brain of like different Zoom like dances that I can start choreographing via Zoom now and record, and then like see how they would translate in person to where then the object that you're holding to do the Zoom becomes the other person. Um, so I'm doing some like create like ideas just like to come to me, but I don't like to follow through on things unless I know like what the plan is with them. And there's no plans right now, so I don't need to do any follow through. I can just sort of let the things come and be like, okay. But
What about you, AA?
yeah.
Oh man. Well, I just finished my second year at Columbia, so as you're saying, end of school, yeah, it happened.
Out of three? Out of three?
Out of three, so thesis year. So no classes. Well, like one class that's like a professional development class, and that's kind of it in my thesis. So I am trying to take a break, which is crazy because I feel like I've just been going straight through. My body wanted to lie horizontally as soon as this happened, but Zoom classes were still a thing, and there was still homework. So that was a bit crazy, but now I'm like totally crashing, which is great. It feels great to just take a rest. In terms of stuff that I'm working on, I had a show, Transgressions, that was supposed to go up at Columbia literally the day Broadway shut down. Was supposed to be our opening night, and we ended up closing also before even opening. So it's been a wild time. We did get lovely production stills, and we're ready to go. I'm making a few edits here and there for whenever theater resumes and we're able to present the show in some way. But it's bizarre having that go on pause right before it was about to happen. And other than that, I'll have to start working on my thesis at some point. I'm working on a trilogy of living room plays about millennials in their living spaces and just sort of battling different forces of toxicity, both internally, externally, which hilariously feels very appropriate for this time. And I sort of conceived of this before this happened. So it's going to be interesting to see just the different resonances in that, what's going to change in those shows that I'm working on based on the current moment, what isn't. Obviously you don't want to write, or you could write a pandemic play, I'm sure people are, but we also don't want to watch stuff, or I personally am not interested,
No.
yeah, in watching something that's like, here we are quarantined,
The environment of this moment and like having to deal with your identity internally or externally, I think just like speaks to like, especially like my experience in as like a like disabled with like emotion, like intellect, psychiatric disabilities and emotional stuff. And so like now I'm seeing all these people, like I feel like I'm more prepared actually for this moment than now all these people are like not dealing well and dealing with like trauma and things that like I have dealt with, and like all of a sudden my alone space is like crowded with people, and it's like things are becoming more like um uh um accessible in some ways with Zoom, but also we're still sort of going at it a very inaccessible way of like just Zoom fatigue of like we're just doing too much. We're still trying to do too much. So I mean, I'm not personally. I'm really trying not. I'm trying to just do bare minimum. But
totally.
yeah, I don't know. There's something that you said about that made me think about.
I
totally
say no to the Zoom things that I don't want to do. And and it's people are asking, and there's some where it's like, yes, I want to work with this person. Yes, I want to have this conversation, but no, I don't want to do this XYZ thing. And so I just say no, and I say I don't have the space, and I'm limiting the amount of digital time, which is only a half truth because we're all sitting with our phones 24/7 anyway.
Yeah, and it just feels crowded. It feels like socially crowded. And so, and people, I think as this goes on and like the more isolated we are for a longer period of time, just like the more people are going to be going towards like mental health crises, which is also part of like the disability experience can be so like universal in different ways. Like anything can happen to your body over time, and anything can happen to your mind over time. And so we're having to deal with the realities of our bodies and our minds in this time in ways that like I think like as disabled people we've had more experience navigating these inaccessible structures like of but like I don't think us as a society, we that's why things have to be accessibility. Like we have to try to make things accessible to people, right? We have to try to open things up instead of having a world that is built with accessibility is built in. If I mean, we're trying to be more like that, but
yeah, and
we
it's
all know the history of the world that we're living in.
right. And it's interesting to see now people realizing like, gee, maybe I didn't need to go into the office. I mean, like there's things that we were missing and we are missing, like you said, and it's leading to more fatigue in other ways. But, all the times, I mean, my great aunt had polio and was a teacher in the Brooklyn public school system for like 40 years. And at first they didn't want to let her teach because they said, how are you going to walk up the stairs to get to the classroom? And I feel like on a larger scale, the moment we're in now is like, anyone who has been denied entry, first of all, that shouldn't happen because we have the ADA, et cetera, et cetera. We're, hypothetically spaces are more accessible physically, but now at a time where nothing is physically accessible, we're seeing that there are other ways to make things accessible. So what do we do now after this moment ends where, folks who for whatever reason would, be better served by accessing something through Zoom or, any of these other forms of communication? What's going to happen? Will this continue, or will we just say, oh, well, that's over now, we don't have to worry about that? Will people still understand when people need other accommodations?
I left New York on March 13th, and I hope the day after Broadway shut down. That was it for me. I was like, Broadway, bye, like Broadway, and then there was no meat at Trader Joe's. And I was like, well, the meat is gone? What? And so I came. But I think about my life there, and I'm very eager to come back as soon as it's safe. But I keep being told by my close friends that the New York I miss so much doesn't exist right now. Like everything I want to do there or be the people I want to be with, it's not happening. But there are two instances where, for me, what I choose to do in terms of access is seen by a lot of people as like privilege, right? Privileged people do this. Privileged people take Ubers and Lyfts instead of taking the subway because they have the money to do that. And privileged people get their groceries delivered because they have the money to do that. And it's like, but I've been doing that. And I've been doing that as a freelance artist who sometimes has great months of income and sometimes has complete 0 months of income, but it doesn't matter. From A to B, I'm still going to get into a car instead of traveling 7 avenues to the nearest accessible subway station. And, and I have friends who are also disabled who say, well, I live in Brooklyn and I have to take a bus 30 minutes just to get to so who are you to talk about your 7 avenues? And it's like, but the choices that I make to preserve my body so that when I show up into a space to be creative or to just be a social human, I'm not like wiping sweat off my body and, about to pass out or like falling asleep in the middle of a rehearsal, because I've chosen to conserve the energy by spending more money on a car. Or to like, I can't carry eggs or a gallon of milk. I can carry a lot of other groceries on the walker, but eggs, I'm sorry, they're going to crack within 3 minutes of stepping out of the Trader Joe's. So I'm going to have them delivered. And now everybody is doing it. Everybody is doing it. And there have to be ways in which, those things are made more affordable universally so that people can continue to use those services if they choose to. And it's sort of like, well, look, you all pointed the finger or thought a certain thing about me when it's just really a physical need for me. And now it's also a physical need for you. And what does it feel like to equate those two things?
Right.
I don't know. That's my rant about
No, I was on that rant.
Yeah. And what does it mean? Also, though, I have some friends who, normally get groceries delivered who now are having a really hard time getting delivery slots and things like that. What happens when, because of overwhelming demand, suddenly the folks who actually need accommodations aren't able to get them. So it's, it's just, you're right. The need isn't special. It's just a need. It's what do you do about that? So I guess we started sort of talking about this, how the way we negotiate our identities personally affects our professional practice. I guess, Ryan, you were talking about, taking Ubers and doing the things you have to do to, make sure that you are working. I mean, what other things do we do? How do we find that our identities are informing our work?
Well, how could we, to the extent that we're comfortable sharing, just go around for those people who may be watching or reading and don't know us, say what our identities are and what those intersections are?
Yeah, I can start. I can do a start us.
Okay.
Cool. I'm like, intro circle, let me begin. Hello. Well, my name's Nik Nicome. Nik. I use they, he pronouns. I'm trans, masculine, gender queer or gender expansive, and disabled, psychosocial disabilities. So I also like to identify as neurodivergent or neurodiverse. And did I say trans? Did I say queer? I'm like queer by all the yeah. What is life? Yeah, that's me. I was like, what else is part of me? Those are the parts that like come to mind when I say like when you say that question.
Terrific.
Yes. Oh, autism. No, I forgot one. Autism too. Yes, in the diversity thing. I like to say that.
Fantastic.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm AA Brenner. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, or she, her, hers. I identify as a non-binary masculine of center woman. Love how all things can be true. Just go with what goes well with you. So that's what works for me. Who am I? I'm a playwright at Columbia, second year MFA candidate there, and also just playwriting in the ether as well. And I also, I'm disabled. I have cerebral palsy, so fun stuff. And I'm Jewish, which is an extra fun identifier, so we put that in as well.
I forgot to say I'm a multidisciplinary theater maker, so I do like music and poetry and acting and choreographing and teaching art. I'm like, I have too many identities that I have to like literally like write them all down to like list them when it comes to these listicle things. I'm like, yo.
For some reason, I thought that string instrument was going to be a rolling pin. I was like, are we baking?
Super multidisciplinary.
It's a ukulele. I forgot it in my bed, and then I laid back, and then it was like, hello, let me introduce you.
I'm Ryan. I think we didn't say our names, but whatever. I am a gay disabled man with cerebral palsy, cisgender male, he, him, his, and I am of Lebanese descent, third generation Lebanese American. And I'm a playwright and an actor and solo performer, which counts as solo performer is sort of the merging of both of playwright and acting. Some people would say solo performance is not playwriting, which is bullshit, because it is. If it's good, it is. And
if it's good.
And so those are my sort of all the identities whoosh into one, and I try to honor the identities, like when I'm making art as much as I can, but some pieces lend themselves to being gay, and some people lend themselves to being disabled, and some pieces are starting to lend themselves to being Lebanese American, because more and more people are interested in the fact that my last name is Haddad, even though I grew up not thinking about the fact that my last name was Haddad, and then everybody in New York was like, what? And I was like, okay, so I'll write about that, I guess, if you want. But what's interesting is that what I find is that even if I have two plays that come to mind. My first solo play is called Hire You Single, in which it's assumed, or it's just sort of given, that I'm gay, and we don't like discuss the implications of what it is to be gay, because the story is about being disabled inside of the gay community. But then there's another play which is called Good Time Charlie, which is a bigger family piece, in which it is assumed or just a given that we don't talk about that I'm disabled, and the gay identity across generations in the same family is the emphasis and is the focus. But it doesn't mean, I walk on the stage with my walker, there it is, the disability is there, so why don't you point to it? One of my favorite talkback memories, we all love a talkback, don't we, was when I was doing a reading was when I was doing a reading of Good Time Charlie, and there were lots of disabled, this is in California, there were lots of disabled people in the audience that came out to support, and they were very excited that the disabled playwright and the performer was being showcased, and I felt grateful to have them. But in the talkback, somebody said, everything in this piece rings so true to me and my experience, except the fact that your parents, the characters of your parents, do not read to me like the parents of a disabled child. And I said, well, thank you so much, because the character of Ryan in this play is between 25 and 30, and if I'm grateful that in my lived experience, like, my family is not talking about the fact that I'm disabled anymore. They got over that when I was 2 and 3, before I was even conscious of what was going on. And I understand that that's not everybody's experience, but I don't think that every piece needs to touch on every individual's experience. I'm talking about from my personal experience. And if you find in yourself that you resonate with that story, great, that's the goal. but it's not supposed to check every box for you, just because it's representative of things that are similar. So how do you find yourselves navigating both serving your individual identities together, but then also speaking for audiences that have those experiences, who may or may not have a lot to say in response to what you're putting out?
Yeah, I don't know. Personally, I've found that the more specific I am, the more people have to say. And even if it doesn't necessarily resonate exactly with their experiences, there's usually something within, the show itself that they can resonate with, right? Because at the end of the day, like, yes, we're writing about things that we've experienced. And yes, our experiences are, going to be unique based on our identities, but also, at least personally, like I write a lot about loss. I write a lot about reckoning with one's own mortality, about codependent relationships, and these are things that transcend identity. It's like their personal experiences. And even if you're not, disabled or queer or whatever it is that I'm focusing on in a specific piece, because I agree with you, Ryan, I also, depending on the show, focus on certain aspects of my identity more than others, just based on, what feels like more of a fit for the piece itself. And I don't even think about it. It's just, I'm writing a character, I'm writing a story. This is what I'm dealing with now.
Mm-hmm.
And intersectionality is a thing, pretty much everything I write is queer in some way. And sometimes it's also disabled, or sometimes it's disabled and also a little queer, and sometimes it's not explicitly Jewish, but it is Jewish, but I think at the end of the day, at least I've found that, yeah, the more specific I make the play itself, the more others connect to it. And also, while I usually do reflect some of my own lived experiences, and in some ways, a lot of it in a specific piece, I also will, write based on my friends' lived experiences. And I'm also interested in the differences, or the so-called differences, between us based on our identities, and the ways people try to navigate that or think that they're really different from each other, when in actuality, we are all kind of the same in our own ways. I don't know. So I don't know. It's just fun to explore that, and fun to just get these characters talking together and see different identities on stage based on my own experiences with people of different identities on stage.
Before we go to Nick, I have a quick follow-up question for you, AA, which is,
sure.
When you write from your friends' experiences, do you ask permission to do that?
I do. Usually I'll write it first, and then mention that I've started writing it, and ask, would you mind reading it? Are you cool with this? How can I best represent your experiences and make sure this feels truthful and honest? One of my earliest full lengths was called God is Dead and April's Getting Married, and it featured very prominently a Mormon character who was getting married and was also queer. And so for that play especially, and whenever I'm really delving into an identity that, sure, I have some experience because I have a friend. Obviously it's different than if it's you, right? So I made sure not only to ask that specific friend, are you cool with this? Can you read this? Can you let me know, what feedback you have, how I can make this, feel more truthful and honest? But I also had other members of the Mormon community read the play and make sure that it resonated with them and their experiences, and specifically the queer Mormon community. So yeah, you want to make sure, no matter what, at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're being honest. And I strive to just be honest.
For me, as like a performer, creator type person, I think that like I'm always trying to like all of my perspectives are so sort of like intermingled with each other, that like it's really hard to, in actuality, like divide any different, like my queerness from like me as like a black person in the world, like me as like like neurodivergent person, like they're different identities, but the intersectionality of them within myself is like, so that core sort of perspective is something that I try to take and put into whatever I'm sort of performing. But then also, like, as if I'm channeling, like I'm channeling that voice who is all of those people or has all those identities, like as a poet, because like I have to something about me has to be expressed, and so like often I will sort of like like things about race spiral into things about gender, spiral into things about like accessibility in the world, and things about like the body and things about the mind. And so like all these things for me are sort of connected, but as 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 like even a performer person in the room, I don't always like do the entire here's all of my lists. Here's my huge list in every room, right? Like I can't be my entire share my entire self with every, you know, individual person. Um, so I try to navigate just like just I'll just say my pronouns, and then if we have to like have more conversations about that, we can. Or because I also have a service dog, so like my invisible disabilities are visible when I walk into a room, not when I'm on a Zoom, unless I show her off. Like,
Mm.
and even then, she doesn't have her vest, so you don't necessarily know unless she does something really smart. She's just so
Oh,
gorgeous.
what a
I know,
face!
right? Look at the face. I can't help, and it's so hard when you're
Hi.
a real
Oh my
person.
gosh.
You want to just be like, "Hi, let me touch you, let me love you," and then, but in real person, I have to be like, "Don't say hi." She's got to focus on me, like she's working. Like I mean she's still working here, but working from home is different. It's different, right? We've all experienced that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like I have to like come in and I have to usually ask for that first, is like please leave the dog alone. And so that's, and my pronouns, and so those are sort of like the things that I kind of have to like lead with. But like also then like I don't know, the kink in my hair, like that come, you know, my racial identity, being light skinned too, it comes in with me when I come into a room, which especially in these artistic rooms, Ryan, as you were saying before, people are like, oh, it's the like what are you question,
Oh, for
what's
sure.
where are you from, it's that like what I want to know about you as a person of color. And like that's such a, I don't know, it's like a very theater industry thing too. I mean, it's probably a society thing, but it's such a weird, you know, theater
I
industry
agree. It's no,
nonprofit model.
it's very specific to theater, and that's why like when I bring it to the attention of my family, you know, as Lebanese Americans, Arab Americans, they go, "What did you just say?" And it's because nobody has had to visually scrutinize them the way that we are visually scrutinized when we walk into a room. And the same is true on the other side of the table. When, as a writer, when you come in and or I'm considering you for a role, I would like to know, like, if I'm getting it authentically correct, and if we're not going to have any taboo moments, because what I perceive the person to be is not necessarily what they are. But again, they want to know, and they also can't really ask those questions. um, Sometimes I've only had one experience professionally where they really just said like, by the way, but it was after I booked the role. And so I didn't feel like I was in any way in jeopardy of it being taken away from me. So I told them I'm Lebanese American. And they were, oh, wonderful. And they were so excited to be able to go and like check that diversity box too. But but it's a very interesting thing, the visuals of theater and performance. Obviously it's a visual medium, of course it is, but to have to be um, so put inside of a box when obviously all of us clearly have expansive boxes, and maybe even, you know, tree houses made of boxes, of all the boxes that we have. It's a very interesting, particularly for our industry, very interesting thing.
Yeah, and then that's how we like each navigate that, right? Like, and I feel like I had to do a lot of learning when I first got out of school. Of like, don't just take anything that like gets offered to you. Like, I mean, that's just probably a
Mm-hmm.
life skill in general, but I think that there's something, especially like just racial things that like I didn't know going out into the. It was also a bit, you know, everybody was more backwards back then too. like 2014 or whenever I graduated. But like, it was just like, how do you, yeah, how do we continue to make work that accurately starts to represent people in their entirety in ways that they don't feel like you have to perform or take, like, perform all of those boxes for people at all moments.
I find that when you're in those scenarios with people who are trying to tell you what to do with your own play or project, if you're talking race, ethnicity, they say, oh, of course, you must. You must. If you're talking disability, at least nowadays, cross your fingers, they're saying, well, of course. In theater, at least, they're saying, well, of course, it's a must. Even trans non-binary, they're saying, okay, yes, we have to, that's right. And they're like, uh-huh, and they nod their head. But then you get into that fourth one, which we seem to all be in, which is gay or queer, or and people are like, well, and that's when they sort of stop nodding their head. And you know, there was a very gay play on Broadway in this last season that was very, very heterosexually cast or hetero-presentingly cast. Only later qualified to expand the identities of those in the cast after it was called into question. And I'm wondering how do we continue to navigate that if we're really pushing for authenticity and we're all queer in some area of the spectrum, if people are going to continue to say, well, what about this wonderful straight actor? And you just go,
I know.
Oh God.
And I feel like you just have to keep pushing though. Like if we just shut up and give them what they want, then of course they're gonna keep being able to do that, you know?
Yeah.
But it's on us to, unfortunately, to just keep asking for it until it doesn't become this like weird question. So it looks like the next thing to discuss is our own evolution of, you know, how we've been members of the disability community in our personal and professional lives. So yeah, who wants to start that off?
My disability is purely mobility disability, and it's a visible mobility disability. I have a walker, you know, so you can't unsee it unless, you know, I'm sitting in a Zoom like this. But even if I start to do this with my hands, you're like, oh, something is happening. So I would say that, like, when I was young, I worked very hard to acclimate and integrate with non-disabled people. There was a perception that because I was physically disabled, it meant that I was also intellectually disabled. So there were early attempts to get me into special ed, which my parents like vetoed. But then I also sometimes had to veto and be like, why are you taking me out of this class at 2:10? Like, I don't understand why I'm in this room by myself. And so that was a big push. I just watched this extraordinary film called Crip Camp, which you almost see if you have not. But this idea, they mention this kind of like when they're passing the law about, I want to say it might have predated 504, but it might have also been part of 504, that like public schools, when allowing disabled people to enter the public schools, there would be one school per district that would, or a row that, I'm sorry. What I'm saying is, in the public school system, at least where I grew up, but based on Crip Camp, I learned that it was probably a national thing, that every public school system had to have one building per category that like met the ADA requirements, and the disabled people could go there, but only one for like elementary school, and then junior high school, and then high school. And in my scenario, I was not in the neighborhood of that school. So they were going to just like put me there because that's where all the disabled people went. And I was like, excuse me, no, because I had two older brothers who went to the high school that I wanted to go to. My father went to the high school that I wanted to go to. And yes, that was the high school I ended up going to. And that high school had to make a lot of adaptations. Even if they couldn't, you know, take a jackhammer to the stairs, they needed to find a way to like allow me to exist as a student in that school. So I didn't have a ton of integration with disabled people or peers until I went to something called the Ohio Youth Leadership Forum in the middle of high school. And then I went back as a counselor in college. And it was all different kinds of people with all different kinds of disabilities. And it was really this crash course in like, how do you exist in a space with people who are different than you? Even though we're all disabled, we're all so different. And if I don't know how to interact with the deaf or hard of hearing community or the blind community or the neurodiverse community, all these different differences are now in one place. That was the beginning of my education, was sort of like Crip Camp, having to like, here we all are, and how do we all get along? And how do we not all make fun of each other for our respective disabilities? I, of course, was not making fun of people, but I was watching people get made fun of by other disabled people. And I was like, do you not get it? Like, whoa. And then I came to New York, and being introduced to Greg and the Apothetae and Jesse Yates, a dear, dear friend of mine, and all these different types of artistic disability communities, that brought into the way that what I knew about inclusion, both inclusion in theater and broadly, and how, you know, to be cognizant of other people's experiences and needs in a way that if you don't have that broad education or evolution, you're really just in a lane by yourself. And we by ourselves are not the definition of disability as a whole. That's my speech.
Mm,
Amazing.
I love that.
Cool. All right. I guess
There's more. No, you each have to talk about
Yeah, we
your
have to talk
disability.
about it. Yeah, our experience. I
yeah.
can go next if you want me to.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay, cool. Because you mentioned somebody who was a part of my experience too. Well, multiple people that were part of my experience too. I have to let the cat out. This is the cat wants to go in, the cat wants to go out. There we go. But yeah, so when I was young, I was like, I don't know, different. When I was a little baby, when I was growing up, so I grew up in all white, well, not all white, but mostly white neighborhood. And so, like, experienced like bullying or like, you know, that social weirdness, that like outcasting effect of like, you over there, right? That like effect growing up. And so like was able, as I was growing up, and my parents were like, you need to take all the arts, because arts really worked for me, like music and dance and stuff. So they kept me really busy with that kind of stuff. So performance really helped me like deal with things emotionally and like find sort of like, I think like my expressive voice, especially just like verbally, linguistically, like just learning so many things that are really important life skills. I think people um, usually under the autistic umbrella don't sort of like learn, I think, because I don't know, or like aren't taught in the right ways. Maybe that's like the better way to put it, actually. um, and like there was this point when I was young when like I was evaluated for like intellectual retardation, and then they just like stopped. Like they didn't kind of go deeper. I feel like that, especially being assigned female at birth, like that was something that is a common theme for people on like autism spectrum that are like non-binary or like female identified growing up, is like not getting diagnosed like until like their 30s or stuff like that, because like it's so easy to, you know, kind of quote unquote socially mask as a as a femme person, or like the way that you're taught to handle it by society and stuff. So like I did I think performance helped me in a lot of ways, but then it also helped me act perform neurotypicalness enough to like not like have my teachers like, because I was like not paying attention in class because like it was boring and I could still like get good grades. So I don't know, you know, I don't know. Anyway, so I was like I had no sort of concept of that, but like also at the same time really struggled from that like mentally, and like suffered trauma and stuff from basically not learning about race and like how people were treating me because of race, but then also just like gender and all those other things. So like I went through this period of like spiritual growth and transformation, and what like a breakdown, but like a breakthrough. These periods can be really scary when you don't know like what's going on, but like I don't know. I had like a breakthrough when 45 was elected, and I started like really like trying to get to like the root of like, I was gender questioning for a really long time, even if I didn't necessarily have the words for it. So I was getting to the root of like my gender identity. And then there was like a conversation that I had with Jesse at that time, because I was in like all these sort of like radical mental health spaces. And I was also sort of in autism spaces as like a teaching artist, actually. And so I was learning about autism from that side of things, which was always sort of weird, because you're learning about things and you're like, why does this work for my brain so much? Like, then you're like, oh, it's like you're having your aha, oh my God, this is like me things. And the and also then just like the state of autism organizations being so led by people that are in control of autistic people, or the parents or the caregivers. And so like I could see, even as a teaching artist in those spaces, how people would silence people who are nonverbal, or make fun of them, things that like, you know, that shouldn't be, that aren't good ways to give care. Like, just not good ways to give care. So it was interesting, like being able to like, at least for a while the organization that I worked for, I do know that we're not talking about it, but I we're not going there. But like being able to like communicate with people in ways that are not just like verbal, and like not just from like, I think that there's like an intersection between like dance and moving your body, like, and nonverbal communication and autism, that like I was sort of like, I hadn't quite gotten it yet. And then I had this conversation with Jessie Yates and about our disability experiences. And I don't want to, you should definitely do a blog with her one of these days about her experience. But it in even though she's physically disabled, my sort of psychosocial disability, like understanding that I didn't know that I had it, that was something that we shared together. Like, oh, that you can have something going on with you that you don't even understand is going on with you, and that's okay. So like, I growing up, like I was never diagnosed, but like now like I have community, and I have like, I was able to like meet people at, like, from understanding these things about myself. And so yeah, that's sort of my disability. And so arts is also connected with that, of like I've just been an artist, and like trying to express myself and like use arts to heal myself and my community and stuff. And then yeah, I don't know, I'm like, there's so many like just things that were just under the surface for so long, and like now they're sort of just like rising. Like I have, ever since I got my service dog like 2 years ago, I've been so like taken care of, and like so much like, I don't know, it's so even though if other people understood and like actually let her work more, like it would be better if like the world was better. But like even just having her has helped me so immensely that like yeah, I'm more grounded. Like that's what she does for me. And so I can talk about these things and like I was in so many dark places um because I didn't have tools or support. And so I had to like find those supports and like learn these tools of self-advocacy as I was also trying to learn and understand my identity over time. And be an artist and be an artist and juggle those things all at the same time. So
I totally relate to the idea of things bubbling and not knowing that they're there, or kind of knowing that they're there. So like, obviously I've had CP my whole life, but I actually didn't know that it was CP until I was like 12 or 13. My parents just told me that, you know, my legs were different and that was it. I had like heel cord lengthening surgery when I was 4. Before that, I had braces that I wore all the time. Then after surgery, it went to night braces and orthotics during the day. Now I just wear my orthotics. And yeah, most people, I walk with a little swag, but that's about it. So most people are like, oh, your walk is so cute. And I'm like, yeah, I'm disabled. How about that? And actually, the first time that happened to me, I was like in 9th grade, and I thought that the guy who complimented my walk was making fun of me because growing up, you know, I was made fun of. But actually, he was hitting on me, and I had no idea. Thought it was hilarious that like, okay, I have CP, and all I got is this cute walk, you know. But I didn't find out about it until I was at a doctor's appointment. My pediatrician asked, "How's the CP going?" And I said, "What's CP?" And I went home and I Googled it. So that's how I found out that I'm disabled. Um, and from there, it took me many more years to realize there was a whole community of disabled people out there. I had almost no idea, just because I'd spent literally my entire life just, you know, within the non-disabled community, not even, first of all, knowing I was disabled. Second of all, once I knew I was, not really knowing what to do with that because I'd never considered myself part of the community. It wasn't until college where I had the good fortune of meeting a dear friend of mine, Jordan Berger, who is now at NYU Law studying disability advocacy and law, obviously. She's,
advocacy.
yeah,
Sorry
she's
to interrupt. Keep going.
amazing. And we were like, I met her in all places on a wine tour because we went to Cornell, and that's just what happens. And we started talking about disability, and she just got me way involved with the community right away off the bat. So if it weren't for her and that wine tour, I wouldn't be here right now, which is really insane. And yeah, Jordan has been a great friend and really encouraging me to, you know, be part of the community, first get involved in the community, learn more about the community. And then I started writing, you know, about my experiences as a person with CP, which is not something I ever did. I've been writing plays since I was in 9th grade, been writing other things since I could ever write. But it wasn't until I was about 22 that I wrote anything featuring a disabled character, because it just, again, you know, because it had been sort of erased for me just due to circumstances. It was something that was erased in my writing. I just didn't even think to write about it. And then when I did, you know, it was so freeing and amazing to just put my full experience out there in a way that I never had before. You know, I wrote like a character who has CP, but the play's not about CP, which, you know, as we know, that's what we love. That's what we stand. Not that there's anything wrong about writing anything that's directly about disability itself. I mean, Greg and I wrote a show about driving through disability history, essentially. But it's also, I don't know, it's just the representation is amazing. Showing your full self is amazing, and different parts of myself that I didn't even know were parts of myself, and communities that I didn't even know I was a part of. And it's just been so amazing to like continue to grow in that way and learn more and meet more people and become more invested in the community. And I know it's just really soul affirming, and I wish more people knew, you know, or I don't know, in my case, definitely my family thought that they were doing the right thing by not telling me because they didn't want me to feel like I was different. But actually, in so doing, they incidentally blocked me off from a community of people who I could have connected to. So it's almost more isolating than it would have been otherwise. So it's just very strange, but I'm happy I found my way here, and I'm happy to be here. water's great, cookies are great, whatever metaphor you want to use, love it. So yeah, I don't know. That's sort of been my journey.